No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Albert Einstein.
There was an older man. He was probably 30 years older than I was. I don't know how old he was, building up birth certificates, but he was very ill. And I went to look for him and find him, and he was bedridden. He was blind. And I walked in the room, and without saying anything, he said, "Mr. Chris, I dreamt of you last night."
Chris Thomas remembers well where he came from and how he got to where he is. As a young Peace Corps volunteer in rural Sierra Leone, he quickly understood that the people who had so warmly welcomed him into the village were rapidly teaching him valuable lessons about life and community. I think it's fair to say that he has spent the rest of his life paying those lessons forward and helping to unleash human ingenuity all over the world. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I was born in a small town in western Massachusetts, West Springfield, Massachusetts. It was a very, typical New England town with a very long and proud history, sense of itself. But also it was a funny place. You know, that pride can also be a bit limiting. And I guess the quirky thing about that area is that I grew up thinking New Jersey was the South and thinking that the Midwest started at Albany, right? I would say it was comfortable, right? There were good schools. There was a lot of nature. You were able to kind of run free as a child. At the same time, it was this late 60s, 70s. There was a lot of social ferment in the air. There was the anti-Vietnam movement. There were the civil rights movements. There was the women's rights movements. There were the LGBT movements starting. And it was an exciting time, right? Because you felt change in the air and you felt people debating things and trying to be on the right side of history. Initially, I think I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to go out and see the world. That passed pretty quickly, but I did want to see the world. I was inspired by, I think, that change going on around me and that sense that the world could be better than it is. I just had an inkling that I wanted to be part of something bigger.
Who were the people that influenced you or had a good impact on you at the time you were growing up?
One is a great aunt, Marion Bruni. She was one of the first women in the District of Columbia to get a PhD. She was a psychologist. She worked with Native American groups in the Midwest and in Arizona later. And she was just somebody who was elegant and smart and knew the world and cared about people and dazzled young people. The second person is my grandmother on my father's side, who was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. And she was somebody I spent a lot of time with as a child. And, Armenians kind of let their stories out bit by bit. I think they do that to protect the next generation. But she had an amazing life, barely survived many episodes, but came out the other end optimistic, productive, a can-do attitude about things, just solid and grounded and strong. I would say just incredibly generous, yeah. She had left southern Turkey during the massacres, and she and her sister were two of the only survivors in her family. And her sister ended up in Aleppo, Syria. And they wrote back and forth to each other for 60 years. She had never gone back, but I took her back when she was 80 years old to meet her extended family.
That must have been incredible.
I was afraid that going back would trigger all sorts of memories of she would speak about her childhood in a very idealistic and charming way. She grew up in southeast Turkey in a town called Mardin, and then it was all shattered. And I was afraid that would trigger things coming back, but she just slipped right in. Language, people, knew her way around the old town, and ended up passing away 2 years later. So it was a good circle in her life, I would say, a good closure.
What did you know about Sierra Leone
What did I know about Sierra Leone? Not much. I started reading as much as I could. There wasn't much available. It was pretty much a blank slate. I learned what I did on the ground when I was there. I was excited again, sort of appeal to all my ideals, try to make a difference in the world, try to contribute, be useful, travel, understand another culture, another place. I didn't believe I could save the world, but I thought I could make a difference here and there. When I got there, you learn very, very quickly that you end up learning a lot more than you end up giving. And that change is a two-way street, right? It's not from me to you. You just see how incredibly resourceful people are there. You have to be to survive in a place like that, in a rural village in Sierra Leone. People are resourceful. People are smart. They're funny. They're caring. They take care of you. You take care of them. I was an agricultural volunteer, but again, in a small place, you end up doing all sorts of things. We had a cholera epidemic while I was there, so we were trying to teach people to make oral rehydration solutions. We built a school, built some grain drying floors. I tutored kids after their school sessions, all sorts of things, yeah. You need to be a jack of all trades. You fit in because you develop relationships with people. That you feel very quickly and very strongly. You also, I think, being in a place that's so different, there's a young person coming out of almost any community or college in the U.S., there's a lot of pressure to conform to things, to be a certain model if you're going to be an athlete, or you're going to be an intellectual, or whatever, or be part of this group or that group. When you're off in a place that's so different, you realize that it's okay to be yourself. You're different. There's no question about it. And it's fine. So it gives you a lot of confidence, I think. I was lucky. I had a small concrete block house with a tin roof. I loved the sound of the rain hitting that roof at night. Below that was a swamp where people worked. I hear voices coming out of that. People are laughing. They're exerting themselves, plowing and harvesting. In the ocean beyond that, so you can hear the waves and the breeze. It was a beautiful place. But what I remember most is sitting at night with people. There was no electricity. So it was just that intensity of sitting around with a candle or a kerosene lamp and just seeing the faces in front of you and nothing else. And that intense human experience. And voices, the very gentle, caring voices of people. In the town where I lived, that people would gather there was a little, not a square, but a little center of town where people sold snacks at night and gossiped and caught up with each other. And I used to walk in every night. And after a while, these little kids started showing up and walking me into town. And they'd hold my hand and walk me in. And one day I said, well, why are you, I can come in by myself. Why do you come every day and get me? And they said, oh, our parents send us. When you walk, you look at the moon and the stars, and they're afraid you're going to step on a snake. So they sent us to make sure you're safe and to come in. And that's the kind of place it was. It was just amazing. People are curious, obviously. They're around you all the time. They don't want you to be alone. You grow up there, you're surrounded by friends and family and people all the time, and it's kind of unnatural to be alone. They just wanted to keep you company. Get on a bus and it would be empty and somebody would come up and sit right next to you and start talking to you, right? That's the kind of... I wish we had more of that in the U.S. We could benefit from that. One of my, I would say, heroes in the village was Paramount Chief, Kumkanda, and his family. He was a former governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone. Very proud person. He started the Sierra Leone National Dance Troupe, very deeply understood the arts and culture. And I was incredibly privileged to be able to spend almost every evening sitting with him and listening as he mediated disputes in the chiefdom, as he shared his life experiences with people. He lived in a mud block house with his family, which consisted of, he wouldn't tell me how many children because he said, we don't count children. we count cows. But he was that type of person that just, any child that needed help, they were adopted into his family. And they were supported in school or with food or with whatever they needed. You never really knew who was related to who in a Western sense, but they were all clearly one family. There were probably 100 kids that all needed something, and he was there for them. And he was just an incredible person. And he ended up, during the Civil War, he was just a man of incredible principle. He ran a radio station that tried to counter some of the rebel movements. He tried to mediate peace. He tried to convince people to make space for refugees that were pouring in from different parts of the country to adopt kids. It's just amazing. During that war, for every terrible thing that happened, you saw that there were 5 good things that happened. There were people who organized a self-defense. There were people who picked up children and, ran into the forest with them and took care of them. There were people who tried to help others survive and heal after, rebuild their homes. Incredible leadership. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I went back to Sierra Leone later after the war. I was working for the World Bank at the time, and I wanted to find people again and meet them and see how they were. And there was a young man that I used to tutor or help him with his studies. I wouldn't say formally tutor, but I helped him with his studies during his junior high school. And he had moved to Freetown, the capital. Usman was working as a clerk in a Lebanese grocery store in Freetown and, making probably $1 a day. And we went out to dinner. And he had a family. He lost 2 children, later lost his wife. And we talked and we had dinner, and he insisted on paying for dinner. And I said, Usman, no. And he said, no, you gave me so much. And I couldn't, the dignity, this kid, incredible. And then he died 2 years later. I never imagined that I had that impact on that young man. Helped him through his studies, eventually got the job that earned his livelihood. And he suffered so much in his life, but he always gave back. And he wanted to. And it's a lesson for everyone. You see people with so much potential and so smart. And it's just a fine line of circumstances that give one person the advantage to live a good life and another person not. So let's get rid of that line. Sierra Leone was going through a very difficult time at that point. There were food shortages. There was a lot of political turmoil. There was very high inflation. The IMF and the World Bank had these structural adjustment programs. And I just looked around and said, what structure is there to adjust? It's chaos. And these programs were making people suffer. The government was not in the right place. There were a lot of issues. There was a lot of issues with economic management. There was an agricultural research program that crops never came out of the research stations to the farmers. So there was money pouring in there without any connection to the people. And I thought, these are institutions that people depend on and they have faith in. They have faith in the United Nations, they have faith in the World Bank, but they were somehow being let down and they could do a lot better than they were doing. And that's when I thought, we could do better than that. And so I kind of committed myself to trying, working in the aid world and trying to make it more functional. When I left the Peace Corps, I came back to graduate school at Johns Hopkins. I did a master's in social change and development and international politics, and then went to work at the World Bank in education, and decided to then, after about 1.5 years, leave and go do my PhD in education at Stanford University. And then I went back to the World Bank, and I ended up managing the education programs for Asia and the health, education, and social welfare programs for Africa. And programs, there were three that I really am very proud of from the bank. One was a program to improve girls' education in Western Pakistan and Balochistan. And I had the opportunity to work with some fantastic, just amazing people in Pakistan. One woman in particular, Kortalain al-Bakhtiari, spearheaded this movement to establish community schools and break a lot of the myths around girls' schooling, and ended up setting up 2,000 girls' schools in the province and enrolling 250,000 girls. This in a place where only 5% of the girls went to school previously, and they said it was impossible to do anything. She was amazing. And then in Vietnam, I worked on a program to help rethink the national school standards and then build around those school standards different formulas for funding schools and for monitoring the conditions of schools around the country. And that was just a fantastically successful program. It ended up making a tremendous difference in the country, I think. And now Vietnam is one of the top performers in education.
As you kind of moved up the ranks, how did you stay connected to what was happening on the ground? And then how did you stay optimistic? What energized you in the face of what could be very, very difficult situations?
So I think the first thing is that experience that you have as a young person becomes part of your DNA. So that never leaves you. Secondly, I think I'm an optimistic person by nature. When you look around you, you see change everywhere, right? You might see teachers that, you can say, oh, okay, this school is poor, the school is dusty and dirty, but it's more than people had before, right? So let's figure out how to solve the problem and move on. A few years ago, I was in a school in Tanzania. We were doing a short film on education. Looking around me, the school was kind of a mess. There were holes in the roof, and it was kind of chaotic and noisy and dusty, and it looked like it could be a lot better than it was. And I turned to this guy who was a photographer with me, and he was from rural Tanzania. I said, what do you think about this school? And he said, it's so beautiful. He said, look, all the kids have shoes and they've got books and they've got a roof on. He never had that when he was only 25 or 30 years old. He said, I never had that when I was a kid. And I thought, yeah, he's right? It's gone from nothing to something, and that something will go on to something else. You could pass by and say, oh, this crowded classroom, this chaos. But then you sit down, you talk to the teachers. They have amazing stories. And they're working despite not being paid. They're working despite feeling unappreciated. So let's figure out those strong points and build on them.
Why is education around the world important to Americans, let's say?
By 2050, 85% of the young people in the world will be in Africa or Asia, mainly in South Asia. 85%. If anyone in America cares about the air that they breathe, cares about the economy, cares about whether their pensions will pay out, cares about health, cares about peace and security, they need to care about the education of those children, because that generation is going to shape the world. And they're capable of doing that. Give people the chance. They're very well aware of the issues around them. They will start solving the problems around them. Again, in Tanzania, I was interviewing a young woman who was getting a scholarship for secondary school. It was this program called CAMFED, the Campaign for Female Education. She was very shy, frail-looking child, and she started talking about how difficult life was for her. Her family didn't have enough food and how it was hard to go to school. And I said, what do you want to be when you graduate? What do you want to do? And she sat straight up. She bolted up. And she said, I want to be an engineer. I said, okay, do you have a plan? And she not only had a plan to get to college, she had a backup plan. And I said, what's the first project you want to do when you graduate? She said, I'm going to fix that road. That's been destroying our village for years. And you just see this strength well up. You want to release that. You want to unleash that potential of kids all around you to solve the problems and build the world that they want. And it will be a better world for all of us. I met another girl, Fatima. She was one of many children. Her father died when she was a young teenager, I think. And her mother couldn't afford to keep all the children, to feed them. So she sent Fatima to be a maid in the capital city. And the family was abusing her, and they weren't paying her. The school principal, luckily, again, somebody underpaid, underappreciated, came around the house and asked the mother the next year, where was Fatima? She didn't show up for school, and she was a good student. And the mother explained what happened. And the principal said, call her back, we'll find some support for her. The mother tried to get her back. The family wouldn't release her. So she made up a story and said she was pregnant, and then they kicked her out. Long story short, she ended up back in this small town. She finished high school. Now she runs 2 businesses. She's on the town council. She started a factory to manufacture chalk with other graduates and sells it to all the schools in the district. She mentors other young women and children. And, suddenly the girl that was going to be a maid all her life is a woman who's everywhere. It's in everyone's interest to make that happen, to give every kid that opportunity to flourish. I just taught a class in Bangladesh at the Asian University for Women. 27 students from East Timor, Afghanistan, Rohingya refugee camps coming from Myanmar, Bangladesh, and so forth. They're in a tough situation. All of them are facing very difficult, challenging worlds. My first class started off by talking about United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. I do this because I want them to know that the world can change and that leadership matters. And when you think back to the early 20th century, the world was a mess. 2 world wars, an economic depression, revolutions, pandemics, you name it. It came at the end of World War II that a group of really foresighted people figured out that lasting peace and prosperity would only come by securing the well-being of everyone, of every individual. And that Declaration of Human Rights was just an amazing document. But it really changed the relationship of people to their government. And it was really an act of leadership of some people seeing that the world could be different and putting the individual in the center and understanding that peace and prosperity depend on the individual's well-being, their right to justice, their right to healthcare, their right to education, their right to a decent standard of living, a sense of dignity and freedom. And they changed the world. And if you look at that article on education, very simple language, but very profound. It said education shall be available to all, including people under colonial rule. Education should be free. It shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. These are things we take for granted now, but they were revolutionary at the time. There was a massive expansion of education in the 20th century. And that expansion gave us the Green Revolution. It revolutionized our transportation. It secured our food. It made these great advances in medicine and science and technology. It built the social and cultural spaces that we enjoy now. I want people to see that the world can change. And now we're at a time where everyone is very stressed. There are these social and economic and ecological fault lines in the world. So the set of problems we're confronting is different. But I think the answer is not. The answer is to unleash that human ingenuity and help people solve these issues and build the kind of world that they want.
Have you been back to the village in Sierra Leone where you served?
I have. The last time was, I think, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I really enjoyed going back. Of course, several people that I was very close to had passed away or moved on, but there were many people that I recognized and that had relationships with. That was it was really a joy to see them. There was an older man. He was probably 30 years older than I was. I don't know how old he was. People didn't have birth certificates, but he was very ill. And I went to look for him and find him, and he was bedridden in my brick house. He was blind. And I walked in the room, and without saying anything, he said, "Mr. Chris, I dreamt of you last night." Incredible. Just incredible. And the smile that came across his face, and then being able to sit with him and talk and see how he was and his family. And it was amazing.
Well, that means we're coming to the end of the episode, but I do want to give Chris the chance to answer our dubious Aunt Deb.
Isn't it more important for our future to concentrate on U.S. schools?
One thing is the math, again, 85% of the young people are elsewhere in the world. So the idea that you're better off when your neighbor is better off is one to stick to. The idea that life is a zero-sum game is bonkers. But I guess, if we're my aunts, I would say think of your own parents. Think of our grandmother, again, we didn't call them refugees at the time, but she was a refugee of the Armenian genocide. And think of all the people that helped her along the way to survive and then to prosper. Why would you deny that? Why would you not do the same for anyone else? Remember where you came from and how you got to where you are.
Christopher Thomas is an educator, consultant, and social entrepreneur in residence at Stanford University's Graduate School of Education. He has served as Director of Partnerships for the Yidan Prize Foundation and in a range of corporate strategy and management roles at the World Bank Group, including Lead Strategy Officer, Advisor to the Managing Director, and Manager of Human Development Programs in Asia and Africa. Chris played a key role in defining the World Bank's contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations agreements on financing for development, and partnerships with the IMF and multilateral development banks. He holds an MA in International Affairs from Johns Hopkins and a PhD in Education from Stanford University. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. If you haven't followed us already wherever you get your podcasts, please do so. Please leave a rating. It means a lot. And not only that, but it helps get those algorithms moving this show to the ears that need to hear it, or that we would like to hear it. To learn more about this program, including guest backgrounds, photographs, and a chance to leave feedback, visit softpowerfulstories.org. I'm Christopher Wurst, the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Thanks for listening.